the feedback we've been getting already, I would think more people would be interested in this or trying to come to this meeting.
Mm-hmm. Oh, here we go.
There we go. Welcome to our attendees. We're going to give a few more minutes for people to come in. Again, welcome to those that have joined us. We're going to give till 5:35 to let people trickle into the meeting before we get started. Thank you. So we've had a few more join us, so we're just giving folks about 2 more minutes to join before we start the meeting. So thank you. So a question has come up about the format of this meeting. We set it up as a webinar, but likely with the number that are in attendance, based on what we're seeing right now, we'll promote everyone to a panelist so we can hold it more like the traditional Zoom meeting. Let's give it about another minute, then those that are currently attendees in the webinar, I will promote you to panelists in just a moment. Okay, you should all be seeing the opportunity to rejoin. Okay. I think my microphone is out of order, so let me go ahead and just check my settings here, and I'll be right there.
For what it's worth, Dan, I can hear you fine at my end.
Okay, can everyone hear me better now?
Yeah, audio is fine.
Okay,
And
great.
you're back on screen.
I think, yeah, I think my AirPods tried to connect to multiple devices, so. Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Dan Pauly, Planning Manager with the city. I'd like to welcome everyone that's joining us today. Look forward to a great conversation tonight. So let's start by doing a round of introductions. I can start by introducing the staff that's here, and then for those others that have joined us, if you could just share a couple things, if you're comfortable. No, if you'd rather pass, that's fine. Your name, neighborhood you live in, and maybe how long you've lived in Wilsonville, just so we can get to know you a bit. So again, from the city and our consultants, we have, my name is Dan Pauly, the planning manager. We have Miranda Bateshell, our planning director, with us, as well as Georgia McAllister, our assistant planner. Also from the team, we have Ben Weber with Sarah Architects, who's been focused on a lot of design aspects of this, and Joe Dills, the project manager from Angelo Planning Group, who's very familiar with Frog Pond in this area from previous work as well. And as well, we have with us Mariana Valenzuela, with Central Cultural of Washington County, who has been helping with some of the outreach on this project. So welcome to all of them. And then I will go ahead and call out names. And if you want to unmute yourself and give a brief introduction, starting with Jerry Greenfield.
Yeah, Jerry Greenfield. I'm a resident in Canyon Creek Meadows. Been lived in Wilsonville since 2009. I'm a member of the Planning Commission. I'm just here tonight or this evening to listen in, because I will be on the other side of the table shortly in Planning Commission when we deal with this area formally.
Thank you. Let's go Ron Heberlin, and then after Ron, Mark.
Yeah, good evening. Hello again, city staff and consultants. Ron Haberline. I live in Arbor Crossing. I have lived in Wilsonville for 9 years, and I as well am a member of the Planning Commission. So here to hear what the citizens have to say about the middle housing plans.
Thank you, Ron. Mark, and then Dan McKay.
Hi, I'm Mark McKelvey, and I'm relatively new to Wilsonville. I live in Villebois. I've been here about 1.5 years. Moved here from Coos Bay, and I'm very interested in housing issues. So I just wanted to listen and learn tonight.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Daniel McKay. I have been in Wilsonville for about 6 years and live in Arbor Crossing, and I'm just here to be a more informed citizen.
Thank you. Doris Whaler, and then Jessica Thompson.
Hi, my name is Doris Whaler, and I've lived here since 1964, when the population was 800. I now live in Frog Pond West and will be affected directly by the middle housing.
Thank you, Doris and Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Thompson. I've lived in Wilsonville for going on 3 years now in the Villebois community, and I'm also just a curious neighbor. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you're going to present today.
Thank you. And then screening TM aid or team aid. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Apologies, I have IT issues and I'm in IT, so it's kind of funny. My name's Tina Maida. I've been in Wilsonville for about 5 years. I live with my partner, Mark, here in Old Town.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then Paul Diller.
Hi, Paul Diller. You want to say hi?
Hi, Jennifer Everett, his wife.
And I've lived in Wilsonville for 6 years, and I live in the Meadows neighborhood, and I was also on the Equitable Housing Task Force, which concluded last year.
Great, thanks for joining us, Paul. And then last we have a screen name, Willieville. All right, thanks. So a couple logistics as we get started here. Our presentation is going to have some presentation parts just to kind of give you the lay of the land of what issues that we're working around and topics we're working around on this project. Also really want to focus on having a discussion with you. For the discussion parts, we'll use the raise hand feature that many of you may be familiar with in Zoom. It should be on most of your devices towards the bottom of the screen. And we'll be happy to unmute you so you can pose questions or comment. You're also welcome to use the Q&A feature in Zoom to communicate with, and we'll read those out and answer them. So with that, I will go ahead and let me had one more join that I'll let him introduce himself real quick if you'd like. Corey, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself to the group real quick?
My name's Corey. I'm a reporter with the Wilsonville Spokesman, just here to listen.
Thanks, Corey. So I'll take about 5 to 7 minutes now to just kind of give you again a lay of the land and what I know. I've had the benefit of being a resident here, but also working with this topic for quite a while now. And so wanted to bring you up to speed on what we're dealing with and why we're doing this work. So again, we'll introduce you to the project in that manner and then get your feedback on really what making middle housing a success in Wilsonville. So kind of the first step here is to really get into what is this term middle housing, as it's a term that many are not that familiar with. And so simply put, it's a range of smaller attached or clustered housing types. They're typically built as a similar scale as single family homes. Many aren't familiar with it because it's often called in the development and planning industry missing middle, largely because it's largely been missing from cities' neighborhoods for the past 70 years, though it was more incorporated prior to that, and oftentimes missing from our regulations and not well addressed in our regulations. So getting more specific about what are we actually talking about and what are the different types of housing that fall into this category of middle housing. We have duplexes, which a lot of you are probably most familiar with of all these, and that's where you have 2 units on a lot. Another configuration that's considered middle housing is having a second detached unit on the same lot. Then there's what are called triplexes and quadplexes, which are 3 or 4 units on a lot. One of the most common types of middle housing. We see our homes are called townhouses, sometimes row houses, which are homes on their own lot that have a common wall or what we call a zero setback. There's also something called cottage clusters, which are a grouping of smaller detached homes around a common courtyard. So as we talk about middle housing and use that term, which you may not be familiar with, these are really the types of homes that we're talking about. So then why are we doing this at this point? There's a number of motivations related to policies the city's established. I think most of us are familiar with housing costs and what's been going on there in the region. And in Wilsonville, home prices and rents are rising faster than incomes, and middle housing can provide choices that help address that. Households are changing, options are needed to meet the needs of smaller households, young people, seniors, multi-generational families, and just simply choices, lifestyle choices that people are making. There's a focus, as in all the work we're doing, on equity and inclusion, and recognizing how housing regulations can help create an inclusive and welcoming community. At least we need to make sure that housing regulations are not getting away in efforts to create equitable and inclusive neighborhoods. And on that note, we did adopt this last June as a city, the Equitable Housing Strategic Plan, and that specifically identified middle housing as an opportunity to advance some of the equitable housing goals in that document. And lastly, there's a state law that I want to explain a bit more that Wilsonville and all cities need to comply with, and this is House Bill 2001. So I wanted to take a minute and explain what this is and what it means for Wilsonville. So this was passed by the legislature in 2019 and requires large cities, which includes Wilsonville, to do a couple of things. First of all, duplexes are to be allowed on each lot where a single family home is allowed. The second component is that these other middle housing types, such as triplexes and townhouses, are to be allowed in areas in residential zones where single family homes are allowed. So really what that means is where duplexes are allowed on each lot, regardless of lot size, there's different lot size and other criteria that need to be met for allowance of these other types of middle housing. So those are the main two things that the House bill does. So what it also allows, it does still allow cities to regulate the form and appearance of housing, including middle housing. A key there is that the same regulations need to apply to middle housing that apply to detached single family homes. The standards or requirements cannot result in unreasonable cost or delay in the development of middle housing. And in that, related to that, the state has adopted minimum standards for compliance to make sure that cities kind of define what that standards that would cause unreasonable cost and delay are. So Wilsonville is required to comply with these by June of next year, or otherwise a state model code automatically applies to all of our residential areas. We are a bit ahead of schedule on that from that date for a couple of reasons related to funding and fitting this project that was mandated by the state between some other projects that we're working on. So one question we often get is, where are there areas that are not required to allow for middle housing, or where does it apply? So on one side, the answer is no, that all areas are required to allow middle housing, but functionally, yes, there are areas, because the state law still allows existing homeowners associations that in their CC&Rs do not allow for middle housing, and does not require them to add them. It does prohibit future subdivisions from having CC&Rs that prohibit them, but it does not go back and remove current CC&Rs. So really, functionally, where these new rules will apply most in Wilsonville are Frog Pond, Old Town, and other neighborhoods that don't have a homeowners associations or covenants that talk to the type of housing that can be built in those neighborhoods. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Joe Dills with Angelo Planning Group that will explain a bit more and then get into the discussion. So over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Dan. And hi, everybody. Nice to meet you tonight. Thanks for coming to this presentation. So I'm going to start by, I should explain my role, actually. I'm one of the consultants on the project. I work for a company called Angelo Planning Group, and I'll be the facilitator here tonight as we move ahead in discussion. Start with the process that we're going through. So the little timeline chart that is on the screen right now, from left to right, we've completed our background studies, what we call the code audit. If you're interested in reading those memoranda, they're available through the Let's Talk Wilsonville page about this project. And we're midstream on developing the types of amendments that will be looked at to comply with House Bill 2001 and increase middle housing opportunities in Wilsonville. Those are what we call siting and design standards, things like setbacks and heights of buildings, and then also just the use allowances and many other provisions of the code. So you can see the little blue people in the middle of the diagram. That's our outreach right now. We'll be finishing draft work about the May timeframe because we do have an obligation to the state who's providing grant funding to complete a product at that point. But the city is intending that the work is very much draft at that point. And the work sessions, the opportunities to comment and further revisions can occur throughout the summer. We ran out of timeline here on the page, but it's really basically summer and into the fall before there'll be any kind of adoption hearings. So plenty of time to participate. One more thing about the look ahead here is that this project is specific to middle housing. Some of you might be interested in future frog pond area planning that will be going on. That's on its own time frame. That will start up this year and go for a couple of years. And so this work is kind of a prelude to what will occur for additional frog pond planning. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we thought we would just pause for a moment. Some of you may have brought questions. We want to be sure that we can address them during the presentation. So we're going to just do a little informal checking in with everybody right here. And if you have a question, please tell us, and we'll be sure to cover it as we move ahead in the slides. Dan, am I correct that everybody's a panelist here and so they can unmute themselves?
Yes, that's correct. We have one. I do want to also, though, pause if we can and introduce one of our city councilors that's had the opportunity to join us, Councilor Joanne Linville. So Councilor Linville, if you'd like to introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, Dan. Can you hear me from here?
I can.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, my name is Joanne Linville, and I am the newest city councilor. And although we've had an opportunity to look at some of the planning for the middle housing and some of the work that the Planning Commission has done, I'm delighted to be here and listen and hear some of the questions and issues and concerns and suggestions that our citizens have. So thank you, Dan, for letting me just introduce myself.
Absolutely.
We have a chat that just came through from Paul wondering about typing in questions into the Q&A.
should be enabled, but if you can't get to it, feel free to put it in the chat as well.
Yeah. And let's open it up just the old fashioned way. If somebody has a question, something they're curious about, let's go to Mariana. If you could unmute yourself and
Yes.
what's your comment or question? That you
Yes,
wanna
good
learn?
evening, everyone. First, I have a couple of clarification that I need here. So the second detached units, that's what we also refer to as ADUs, correct? Accessory dwelling units?
There's a difference between the two, and we have some pictures. We'll be sure to point out some examples
Okay.
as we move ahead.
Thank you. And the other question that I have, on the pictures that you showed at the beginning of the presentation, there are some really lovely homes that represent this middle housing. So my question is, the design of the homes, is it going to have to comply with the code in terms of architectural design? For example, I live in the historic part of Forest Grove. I cannot do whatever I want to my house. Do you know what I mean? I need to follow certain codes. So if you want to put like a cluster of cabin style homes, cottage style homes, right?
Yep.
Will they have to follow the design of the overall neighborhood?
Okay, great question, and we'll be sure to cover that as we go through slides.
Thank you, Joe.
Short answer is yes, but we'll dig in a little bit. Anybody else, something that you want to learn tonight or make sure that we cover? Paul has his hand up. So Paul, why don't you go ahead and pose yours?
Hi, this is Jennifer. Paul's next to me.
Oh, yeah.
We've got, I guess, two questions you may cover later. One is if Frog Pond West, if we amend the plan for Frog Pond West to allow more density, more than just duplexes, triplexes and fourplexes, would that impact the density we have to have in Frog Pond East and South? Is that the two remaining ones? So building more density here now mean less density in those future neighborhoods down the road. And then the second thing has to do with the HOAs. I haven't read the state statute, so I'm sorry I didn't come doing my homework, but do HOAs, once an HOAs, what would you call it?
CC&Rs.
Our CC&Rs are expire and have to be renewed. Are we no longer allowed to keep a neighborhood single family? And then second of all, I know there's some neighborhoods in Wilsonville that currently don't have an HOA. Could they put an HOA in now and try to exclude the building of multifamily housing between now and, I guess in the future? So that's,
yep.
Okay.
Okay, great questions. We'll be sure to cover those as we go through. I'm keeping a list, but the collective here, Miranda and others, help us all remember.
Yeah, I will. I'm writing them down, and I thought I would tell you, Joe, because I'm tracking the chat. There's a couple questions in chat. I'll go ahead and list for the good of the whole group, especially for some on the phone. One of the questions is, where will the middle housing project be integrated into the current city? And roughly how many homes are being added to the city? So that's something that will become more clear as we present, and we'll be sure to address that question. The other one that we received was this person, Daniel McKay, has read the transcript regarding a recent city council meeting where preference was mentioned. If there is a preference being inquired about, how does this preference relate to the state requirements? Are areas undeveloped in Frog Pond West exempt from state requirements?
Great.
These are all really great questions.
Yeah.
Do we have answers out there?
Hi, this is Tina again. Thank you very much for letting me know that the compliance is required next summer. However, when Mark had contacted Georgia before, she mentioned that there is going to be rezoning done. So like figuring out the lot sizes and such and the markers. Is there an ETA as to when that's going to occur?
And
Are
Tina,
you
if you could,
specific?
oh, go
Are
ahead.
you specific to Old Town, the zone changing in Old Town, Tina?
Correct. I can just briefly summarize why we kind of want to know. So we're in Old Town, and this manufactured home is sitting in the middle of two lots, right? The lot size is 2. Unlike many of our neighbors are just 1. And in terms of staying here and actually putting a foundational home, there's been some talk of whether or not we wanted to do like having an out and like an in-law unit, but we know there's restrictions here. And then there's also, okay, well, what if we put 2 homes on these 2 lots? We need to get a private surveyor here to place the markers so we know where they are. And we don't want to go paying out of pocket for that survey if it's going to be rezoned here by the city.
Understood.
Okay. All right. Any others that someone wanted to state, or maybe something new that's come in over the wires? Okay. So we've got discussion times later. We'll try and catch all these as we go, but then we can also pick up on it probably in about 20-ish minutes when we get to group discussion. So let's go to the next slide that we had. And I'm going to take the first couple of these, which is an opportunity to talk a little bit about Frog Pond. Bear with us a sec while we get the show back up.
Oh, let me share it again. One moment. Thank you, Joe. There we go.
Okay, so we thought we would sort of start local. What middle housing can we see as we go around the community today? Old Town is on the screen here. This is some newer housing that has been built. Frog Pond West, apologies for the construction shot, but there's a lot of the area under construction. So Frog Pond West does have some middle housing that is under construction, and others, and it is allowed for in that particular code. Charbonneau might be the oldest middle housing with the duplexes around the golf course and so on. And then Villebois, as a master plan community, also has townhomes and several types as local examples too. Go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about Frog Pond West. This is a bit of a focus in the middle housing project because there is, it represents quite a bit of the land supply of vacant land in Wilsonville, at least for lower and middle density housing. All of you have seen the portions close to Beckman Road that are under construction. In round numbers, there's about 90 acres or so that have received some sort of approval, and about 90 acres that is yet to be developed. So that's kind of the size of the area. Frog Pond has a master plan that does require some middle housing. If you go to the development code and look up the residential neighborhood district, it lists duplexes and 2-unit townhomes and cluster housing as allowed housing types. And the little squares that you see on the map are what we call the sub-districts of Frog Pond West. And each of those areas is designated for low or small or medium or large lot zoning. And the 2 yellowish colors on the screen are the small lot areas. And those under the current code are the only areas that have a requirement for some duplexes. It's fairly modest. It's 10% of a given project as written today. So as we move ahead, in Frog Pond, then the question for the city is what is required for compliance with House Bill 2001. And we thought we would show a couple of examples here that talk about the overall density and homes per acre. So let's go to the next slide. Go forward one, if we could, forward two from there. So up at the top, the existing Frog Pond Master Plan averages about 6.7 homes per acre. Compliance with House Bill 2001 requires new master plan areas like Frog Pond West to achieve a minimum density of 8 units per acre. So the existing plan and code is actually pretty close, but there is going to have to be some amendments that are made to provide for middle housing and achieve that numerical requirement of the law. So how does that compare to existing neighborhoods that are close by? At the bottom of the screen, you see the Landover neighborhood. This is back from the area planning process where we went through the same discussion. And as a comparable, Landover is on average about 6.5 units per acre. That's of course taking the smallest ones down close to 4,000, the larger ones that are over by the creek, and averaging them out, but just as a comparable. Let's go to the next slide. And again, thinking about this 8 homes per acre in context, the project that you see under development that is closest to the Beckman Bridge and Beckman Creek area in Frogmont is called Morgan Farm, and that's being planned at 8 homes per acre. If you want to think about a local established neighborhood, then the Canyon Creek neighborhood also averages a little over that. And again, that's the combined averaging of the small homes that are grouped around little green spaces and some of the larger ones that are in the interior parts of the neighborhood. So that's one of the things that we have to be mindful of in planning for Frog Pond West. Let's go to the next slide. So the Planning Commission has been looking for options for how to meet that requirement, and exploring the question of what types of middle housing should be the ones that are added to the list or not within the code that governs Frog Pond West. Through the discussions that they've had to date and a report to the City Council, what they have determined is, as a basic strategy, is to look to achieve that 8 units per acre by, on the undeveloped land, doing some, I'll call a spread of the density, a little bit here, a little bit there, to achieve that number, not just clustered in one area. Their discussions to date have come back to design standards and the quality of development and the character as really one of the most important issues. So Mariana, when you asked about will the code require design and so on for middle housing, it does today for all types of housing.
Yes.
Ben is going to take us through some of those examples.
Okay.
But as we add middle housing types, they also will be required to meet the same design standards. And we have a couple of tune-ups that we'll be doing to those that are in the code.
Okay, yes, because I feel that some resistance for having this happen in your neighborhood for some people might not be so much the density, but actually what is it going to look like? Yeah. You know, when you have, it's just the ambiance, the facade of your homes, what does it look like? Yeah. And then to have a building that it's completely, you know, incongruent with the rest of the neighborhood.
Thank you, yes.
Thank you, Joe.
So the other basic question that goes along with this is, what are the housing forms that are appropriate to Frog Pond West? And if you think back to that slide that Dan showed, that showed the sort of the range of examples of middle housing, duplexes and two-unit townhomes. The Planning Commission has been very comfortable with those in their initial discussions. The other ones that we showed, cluster housing, kind of a mix of feelings about that, but it's sort of on the list for more work to do. And then the what are called triplexes or quadplexes, not currently listed in the code. The Planning Commission wants to explore more design discussion before those are added to the list. And that's really where we sit today in that progression of thinking about how to comply in Frog Pond West with the state requirements. Let's go to the next slide, if we could. I think this just reinforces a little bit of what I've said so far. On the left, you're looking at the underdevelopment. There's a few more homes now, but the underdevelopment Frog Pond West, that's Beckman Road down in the lower left. And, you know, if you pop open the code today, there's a limit on how many dwellings are allowed in each subdistrict of that area. Under the new provisions, that same structure would apply. There's still going to be limits on the number of homes that are allowed within each subdistrict. But we will have to do the amendments that allow it to get up to 8 overall on average. And since duplexes are required as a baseline requirement in the state law to be allowed, those are not counted. So those are allowed on any lot that allows a single family home. Okay. All right, so that's a little bit about the master plan and where what we're exploring. Let's move to design issues right now. And Ben, if you could pick up from here and talk about some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joe. And again, my name is Ben Weber with Sarah Architects, and helping to support this project through some early architectural design thinking, and just trying to understand how these siting and design standards actually create real homes. And to the points you've been making, Mariana, what will they look like? How will it shape a neighborhood? So we'll go through some of those, some of which are fairly hard and fast. Others have a little bit more, not necessarily leeway, but there's more optionality, particularly to some of the design standards. And we'll show those here shortly. So to go through these somewhat quickly, when we talk about these standards, I'm on siting standards right now. And in the world of minimum lot sizes, you know, currently, as Joe showed, there's that R5 small lot subdistrict in the Frog Pond West area currently. The current standards for that, and that should say 6,000 square feet, not 600. 600 would be a rather frighteningly small lot. That's my typo. But the current standards, you know, require that 6,000 for a duplex. An update we have to make to that is to allow the duplex on the same minimum lot size that a single family home would be allowed. So in that R5 zone, that's a 4,000 square foot lot. So that's an example of one of the compliance requirements that will have to be changing in Frog Pond. And it will, you know, allow those duplexes to be built on the smaller lot size you see there.
Hey, Ben, I'm going to sort of tag team here with you a little bit and just jump in at this point, because I do want to catch a couple of the questions that were asked. And this is in on the topics that I was talking about number of homes per acre, and that equates to minimum lot size. The question was asked if Frog Pond West has to increase its density, and it does slightly, then does that impact the density requirements of future Frog Pond East and Frog Pond South? And the short answer is no. As we understand it, the state's requirements are different for the two areas. As a adopted master plan, Frog Pond West is required to do the things that I summarized. When new areas are brought in and master planned in the city, east and south in this case, they have to meet additional requirements for providing for middle housing. Ones that are more, add more units, add more types, more choices, and so on. So lots of work for the city and for the community dialogue on those issues yet to be had on east and south. And then I'll pick up on one other question here, at least relative to Frog Pond. How will middle housing be integrated into the city, and how many units might be added? I think Dan can answer that on a more citywide basis, but if you think about the Frog Pond West area that I was talking about, the integration part of it is middle housing will simply be added as allowances in the zoning code. It's not a mandate. So what actually gets built on a lot is up to the private market, is up to the property owner and developer in the case. And so it's added as an allowance. The numbers that we're talking about here are zoning allowances. So you can certainly underbuild if you choose to. There are some limits on that, but you don't have to build to maximum. And then how many might be added? We've done the math for Frog Pond West, and to get from what the code says today to the 8-unit requirement would add about 125 dwelling units on top of the remaining 500 that the area is zoned for today. And again, those are maximums that are in the code. Few projects built all the way to the maximum, but just as a couple of reference numbers, those are the two that apply to Frog Pond.
Okay. And I can just finish up, Joe, on the rest of the city there briefly. We don't expect a lot, especially on the short term. A couple indicators though that's really determined by the market. Again, it's about allowing, it's not about, it's providing more options to homeowners and developers. It's not creating a whole bunch of new stuff right away. So kind of some numbers that we have, like we've allowed accessory dwelling units for a number of years now. To date, we've seen 10 built and have a few more in for review. But I mean, of the thousands of homes in Wilsonville, that's a pretty small amount. Working numbers that we've heard from other jurisdictions that have had these sort of rules longer are in the neighborhood of like 3% growth. You know, as we look at infrastructure, kind of even a conservative would be like 5% increase over decades. So yeah, not a whole lot, but you know, over the longer term, it could increase a noticeable amount, but in the short term, not really expecting much of a noticeable amount. Obviously, if it's built next to you, you're going to notice it, but kind of overall, not a large amount based on the data we have, both on our experience with accessory dwelling units, as well as data we have from other jurisdictions.
All right, so Ben, we'll let you continue on. And if you have an opportunity with one of your pictures, please describe what an ADU is, an accessory dwelling unit, and how that might differ from 2 units on the same lot.
Yeah, definitely. I was scouring ahead, and unfortunately, I don't have a great photo example of that. So I'll try to paint a picture with words. You know, you're probably familiar with a detached ADU specifically, which is a separate dwelling with spacing from the current dwelling. So there are a number of ADU regulations at the state and the Wilsonville level. Some of which constrain the size that the ADU can be, and also ADUs are not required to provide a parking space is another key standard. We are also, considering detached duplexes as part of this process, and so that would also be 2 separate structures on a site, but they are different by definition, and so there are different standards that apply. Some of the most significant ones are, that second unit essentially could be a co-equal of the first unit. They can have the same appearance and the same size, and both units can have a parking requirement attached to them as well. So those are some of the notable differences between the two.
All right, keep us rolling then through the pics here.
Yeah, so to keep going here, continue on to lot width. Various Frog Pond subdistricts have different minimum lot widths. Those tend to be 35 or 40 feet, depending on your location. You can kind of see that executed in the photo at left. By and large, those standards will apply to most of the middle housing types that come in, except for townhouses, which cannot be required to have greater than 20 feet as their minimum lot width. That's kind of what you'll see in the photo here. This is probably more of a text change, and it's not going to have a huge substantive difference, at least on some of the types townhomes being considered in Frog Pond. Some might get up to about 24 feet now, so it might be trimming around the edges. This is also a good time to point out that, as Dan and Joe mentioned, Frog Pond allows 2 attached townhomes. Rules will have to be changed to increase that number up to 4 attached townhomes.
If the city chooses.
Sure, yes, pardon.
Yeah, and I will call out there that when it comes to Frog Pond, in the short term during initial build out, we have options, but then in the long term for redevelopment, just like the rest of the city, we don't have as many options. So eventually for future redevelopment, we'd have to add 4, allow 3 to 4. But during initial development, the options there to limit it to something like 2.
Okay.
Thanks for that clarification.
Let's go to the next slide.
All right, keep marching. Setbacks, similar situation. There are front, rear, and side setbacks that apply to the homes in Frog Pond. You'll be able to generally apply those in the same way with a couple exceptions. Those cottages, also probably known as clusters in Frog Pond, can only have a maximum 10-foot setback on either side. So that's smaller than the numbers of setbacks in a lot of Frog Pond subdistricts right now. And then townhouses, sort of by definition, are an attached product. So this is really a line item in the code to ensure that the attached side of a townhouse can have a 0 setback. We can keep going. All right, lot coverage. We're starting to see some repeat photos here. Those are in the 40 to 60% range. And lot coverage is essentially a calculation of the building and the driveway circulation space on a site as a percentage of the total area. So the regulation controls sort of how much coverage you can have there. Same rules will apply for a lot of middle types. Townhouses will be allowed generally greater lot coverage because they are considered somewhat of a more urban product. They also have a smaller minimum lot size, so their coverage numbers there would tend to be greater. And then cottage clusters also aren't regulated on the lot coverage standard. Moving on to kind of a different realm here, there's also design standards, and this really helps get at kind of the aesthetic quality of a building. Frog Pond has a number of these in place right now, and those will largely remain. The essential rule is that whatever applies to the single family houses, the rules that apply to middle housing can't be any more complex or challenging. They can't be any more prohibitive. So examples of those are window coverage requirements and requirements for facade articulation, to make sure that the roof and the building face has variation to it. And then Frog Pond also has a pretty robust design menu. I think there's 16 different features in this design menu, and a dwelling has to use at least 5 of those, such as porches, columns, different materials, so on and so forth. At least 5 of those must be applied to help bring that housing variety. that would also apply to middle housing.
I would add, Ben, on when it comes to these sort of architectural design standards, that most neighborhoods in the city do not have these currently. The exception being Frog Pond, as well as Old Town has design standards, and Vilbois has design standards. And for the most part, those will continue to apply to middle housing with some necessary just kind of functional changes. However, part of the conversation is, are there reasonable additional standards that would apply more broadly in the city to both middle housing and single family going forward? So that's part of the conversation we're having as well, and interested in the community's feedback on that.
Yeah, good point. And simply remembering that if additional design standards are considered for middle housing, they would also have to apply then to single family housing in those same areas. So it's a two-way street. And then finally, there's a house plan variety requirement that adjacent and opposite dwellings not be matching in terms of their facade or general structure. So that's just trying to bring variation into that. There's nothing huge about that rule that we would have to change, other than a little bit of text language to ensure that that doesn't rule out triplexes, quadplexes, or potentially up to 4 townhouses that are attached. Sort of make sure it doesn't get caught in the legalese there. So, but again, remember this rule applies to the structure. So that image on the right is one structure, even though it's 4 dwellings. So a bit of a nuance there.
Okay, let's move on to, so we got a few discussion questions here, and let's pick up on this first one by catching those that we haven't answered yet. Dan, what's the deal on HOA that change over time? So the question was, if a CC&R is renewed, does an HOA have to add middle housing in the future?
On that particular question about renewal, so let me first of all say, an area that doesn't have an HOA today, as of even past when the bill was passed, you can't go back and establish new HOAs today to prohibit this type of housing, even in existing neighborhoods. It's just kind of existing CC&Rs at the time that the bill was passed were kind of grandfathered, and the legislature chose not to reach back to them for whatever reason. But going forward, any additional CC&Rs, either for new or existing neighborhoods, would need to allow these. In terms of the question of what if like your CC&Rs expire and renew them, that's a pretty legal question that really I'd advise you to consult with an attorney that specializes in this on. And what we put on our frequently asked questions and kind of our cities is, we're not experts at CC&Rs. We don't even have copies of all of them. If someone even comes into one of these neighborhoods with CC&Rs and wants to build middle housing, as a city, we're obligated to approve it from a zoning standpoint. But then it really is incumbent on both the property owner or the builder to research that before they go in, or if someone disagrees with something, builder, is really on them to either as an HOA or private citizen to take legal action to prevent that or enforce existing covenants. So the city really doesn't get into that discussion or that enforcement, but we also acknowledge in reality that they do exist, and that can determine the extent that this type of housing is built in the future.
So next one, Dan, was about preferences that were discussed at City Council. Can you summarize? I think that's what the reference was to. May have been to Planning Commission. So talk a little bit about preference questions that have been before those folks today, and is Frog Pond West exempt in any way from middle housing?
Sure. So just briefly, as the planning commissioners kind of test, I've talked way too long on this subject. But the brief of it is that the rules that implement these on the state level treat master plan communities differently. So than areas that are established. And so in that sense, they're treated differently. So in a way you could argue they're exempt, but still they have to meet the intent of the rules. It's just a little different. There's some very specific things around this 8 dwelling units per acre that are fairly minute details actually in the rules, but end up having kind of a significant impact for this specific case of Frog Pond West. So it gives us an option really to get up to that 8 dwelling units of acre to kind of qualify for this special exemption for Frog Pond West under the state rules of how to get to that 8 dwelling units an acre. And and really in that sense, during initial build out of Frog Pond, we have some options as we understand the rules now. Granted, we do not have a final answer or approval from the state, but this is our working understanding based on inquiries that we've made to them at this point, is that we have some options to essentially update the existing master plan so it can take advantage. And in that sense, we may not need to allow every housing type in Frog Pond West during initial development. And that's really the options we're talking about, whether it's just these duplexes and 2-unit townhouses, or do we choose to also allow the triplexes or 3-unit row houses, for example. That's really the extent of the options we're talking about. Overall though, I mean, throughout the city, both existing development and the rest of the city, as well as Frog Pond, once it's developed, it has to allow all these housing types.
Okay.
It's a little nuanced, and hopefully that's a concise, fairly clear way to explain it. So happy to talk to anyone at a longer term about kind of the details and how that all works. It's somewhat complex. So
there's a lot of jargon buried in all of this.
Yeah.
We do our best to speak plain English.
There is a lot of jargon, and I think that there might be a secondary component to that question that we received. So I'd like to add just a little bit that may help, or maybe more than people needed, but I think it's worth maybe some clarification. Is that because the new urban growth planned areas like Frog Pond West have slightly different rules or allowances, if we choose to use them, than the rest of the city. That was the initial policy question, or I think as was stated in the question, that was kind of the preference check we were doing with the Planning Commission and the City Council. So when we look at Frog Pond West, we can look at, okay, so at this initial build out of this area that we just did a master plan, we could either keep going, which would not be in compliance with the state. And if we do that, then the state like model code would apply, and it would kind of result in these new allowances that would be allowed. Versus should we tailor something for Frog Pond West? And if so, to what degree do we want to integrate the different middle housing types that are allowed based on House Bill 2001? So the initial direction we were getting from Council and Planning Commission was just to understand what are kind of within that window of what we can do based on the state. Where do they want to land? Do they want to open everything up? Or do they want to take more of a tailored approach? And so, and both of those could comply. I think that's what the question was. Both of those could meet the standards within House Bill 2001. It's just a matter of whether they meet the citywide standards or whether they meet the standards for an area that's in a new urban growth area that has a master plan but is not constructed yet.
Okay. And we have some other things we want to get to. Thank you, everybody, for your attention through all this. Dan, I'm going to challenge you to give the shortest, most concise answer you can on the Old Town rezoning question. We actually have a whole nother meeting that we're going to do on Old Town, but could you address Tina's question about upcoming rezone in Old Town, should there be one?
Yeah. So briefly, and Tina, I'm happy to have a one-on-one conversation about your specific case too. And that may be best as you have some specific questions. But in short, we're exploring ways to make the code work in Old Town, as some of the zoning is a little antiquated, and even the neighborhood plan called for some updated zoning in Old Town. And so we're trying to integrate that into the project to do that updated zoning. But in the end, kind of the allowance, what's there today would still be allowed, as well as the middle housing types that are related to this code work would also be allowed. So that's the short of it. In some ways, it's kind of a technical fix, but it's also could be a significant change for a property that's kind of in your scenario. So happy to talk about that in more detail one-on-one. And also on March 9th, we're having an Old Town specific neighborhood meeting to talk through more of those details.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate that. And yes, I had thought about who I could reach out to individually with all my questions and concerns. And I appreciate that offer. Thank you. I can reach out to you specifically for a one-on-one.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
So let's move on to the next slide here. And we want to sort of tap into your past experience. Maybe you lived in middle housing. I know our first house that we had was kind of a duplex arrangement in inner Portland. So we go to the next slide, if we could, Dan. So a pretty simple practical question. Think of middle housing you've seen in Wilsonville or elsewhere. What design features do you like? What design features don't you like? And I think we're going to try the group process again. If we could switch to faces here. And anybody that wants to start, something that really strikes you as a positive, or maybe something that's a negative when it comes to middle housing design. Ron, did you want to go?
I would
Please
just clarify, Joe, do you want those, are you okay with those in the chat, or do you want people to speak up, or are you okay with both?
Let's do verbal, but you can type into the chat as well, and we'll read those. So both is the short answer, but I'm asking for anybody that wants to be verbal, and typers, go ahead and type away.
Well, this is Joanne, and I can speak up. I live in middle housing in Charbonneau. And of course, my house was built in the late 1970s. So it's been an established neighborhood for quite some time. I can tell you that I live in a 2-unit. It's not a duplex, it's considered a townhome, but it is, the thing that's wonderful is that if you didn't know that I had a common wall, you would not know that I'm in a, I have a roommate and that we share that common wall. My front door is on the opposite side of the building from my roommate. And the only negatives that I really have encountered is based on our CC&Rs, we have to make a decision about the color of our home when it's painted. And that's different from a person who lives in a single detached unit. And the same with our roof. We have to agree on the same roof, should it be replaced. And the other is that if there are common wall issues that happen, the CCNRs may or may not cover all of the instances that might occur. And I'll just tell you quickly, I had a my roommate had a roof leak that leaked down into the common wall. And so I had mold in my attic that was, that needed to be remediated. And the only way for us to manage that was to go through mediation, legal mediation, to resolve any conflicts. So the idea of being connected to another building, there are issues that occur with that. But beyond that, I'm absolutely delighted. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I think if the design is done correctly, it's even difficult to tell that there are multiple units that are there, because they're not like a row house.
Great. Thank you, Joanne. Anybody else? Something you like
Paul
or
and-
some? Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
Paul and Jen had their raised hand. If you want to go ahead.
Sure. Hi, thanks. Yeah, a couple things. From an aesthetic point of view, having been over in Villebois, I have to say I really like. We have friends who live in an attached townhouse there, and they have the alley with the garage at the back. And I think when you're, I find that to be a lot more friendly and approachable, to have people have front doors and porches when you're putting housing like that. My parents live in a semi-detached, a duplex, not around here, but the garages are kind of the feature of the house, and it's really hard to distinguish a house where we can't say we're the one with the red door, because all you see is the garage, and so that's more aesthetic. But then also, speaking of seniors, one thing that I think is somewhat missing in Wilsonville, and we see it in our neighborhood, is the one-story houses go so fast when they hit the market. And there really seems to be a hole for people downsizing, or maybe just starting out, but especially I'm thinking of the downsizers looking for one-level living. And I know there's all sorts of costs and things, and developers have to balance a lot with the price of land, but that seems to be a real hole in our community, on top of affordability. But when I think about my parents' duplex, though, although it has a second story, it's built with a master on the main, and so an older family can think, or a family with an older family member can think about aging in place. So
Okay, great comments. Okay, thank you, Jen. Let's go to Doris.
Hi. Some of the questions I have about townhouses or even middle housing in general is the parking question. I think the new code that was passed by the state, or the new law rather, only requires one parking space, or does it even require a parking space for a townhouse?
Let's pause on that. Dan, I think you're our best source on that.
Sure. So Wilsonville, for most single family homes and most other housing types in Wilsonville, currently require one parking space per unit. The new rules, they limit cities' abilities to require more than one space per unit for these middle housing units. It's still a requirement, and we anticipate still requiring one space per unit. One key thing, so I mean, we can't really have much leeway there, but what we can do is make sure that something I've heard in my years of experience is like, okay, you require a parking space, but it's in a garage, but then they fill their garage with storage and they're out on the street. So we can certainly look to make sure that that required parking space is usable for a parking. space. So, if it's only the garage, maybe require that they keep the garage clear, and there's legal mechanisms to do that. And we've actually used that on a project before. Or maybe we encourage them to do, to provide the exterior parking space that is less likely to be used as storage, so that that one space that is provided is actually used for parking. So that's kind of more what we're looking at, is making sure that what we do require is as usable as possible. And that's kind of the focus. But it is the only change in terms of parking from a state requirement is the House bill did limit cities' ability to require parking for accessory dwelling units, but it did not limit their ability to require a parking space for any other types of units.
So of course, the problem is that there aren't very many units that have just one car associated with them. And so we have a problem with street parking.
Okay, good. Any other items you wanted to, or topics you wanted to cover, Doris, while you're speaking?
I do have another topic on affordability. How many square feet are these townhouses that are being proposed? Because unless the square footage is drastically reduced from single level homes, I don't see how they're going to be affordable.
And they're not necessarily going to be affordable in terms of how it's defined by the federal government or other agencies. I mean, there'll be a lower price point than detached homes. There's no square footage requirement. But I mean, you look at markets in place that have quite a few of both, such as in Villebois, and they are a lower price point, but I mean, it's not like they're, right? They're still market rate. People, probably paying, by the time these are built, I mean, you're probably still talking at least in the 4s, likely in the 5s, 500 range for this sort of unit, compared to at that point, maybe the lowest priced single family home in a neighborhood, maybe 700,000 or 800,000.
Yeah, the larger issue is that the types of changes that we've mentioned tonight about providing more middle housing is that those are not requirements in the sense that a property owner needs to build them. They're not a mandate in that they have to be a particular price point. But what they do is they provide more of a framework for those that do want to provide a little bit more lower cost type of choice. The code is not in the way, so to speak.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's go to the chat. Did we have a couple things come in chat, Miranda or Georgia?
Yeah, we had a couple comments come in. We had a couple folks say that they prefer a private backyard rather than providing patio space or space in the front. That's less of a priority than the backyard or private area would be. And then there was a suggestion about maybe a covered parking space as opposed to a garage. That way discouraging using that space for storage as opposed to parking. And so by having that outside, it would help that. We also have a new hand raised by Daniel McKay, if he has a question or some comments.
Okay. Daniel, please. We're not quite hearing you yet. I do see you're unmuted.
Mm-hmm.
Might have an audio. Oh, well, one symbol says that the mute is still on. Okay, so
let's circle back.
We'll circle back, and if we can't get the audio going, please send a chat, and we'll be sure to read it. Okay, let me ask a kind of a similar question here, but I want to ask you to visualize a little bit. So the next question is a bit of a story. And imagine that you leave Wilsonville here soon and return in 20 years. COVID is gone. You get to go off to somewhere nice, South Sea Island or something. And you come back 20 years from now, you're young and fit, and the city's middle housing code has been successful. And as you walk around Frog Pond or other neighborhoods, you actually really like what you see. You're thinking, good job, Wilsonville, this worked. What do you see? Try and visualize what success is when you come back in 20 years and this has been done well. And Daniel, let's see if we got the audio back going here. I do see your hand still raised.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Apologies for that. If the intent for Frog Pond West for the city of Wilsonville is to achieve the, I guess, the minimum number of lots per acre, as I understand it, is there a option or consideration that the city has to leave areas of Frog Pond West unaffected by the changes in their plan, but to maybe designate some areas for potentially smaller lots that would allow for, or essentially restrict development to something like townhomes, which would be a very small footprint lot. As I understand it, and I could be wrong, so please correct me, but typically the townhomes would be on a very small lot because each owner actually has an ownership of a lot, whereas a duplex is typically a larger lot because it's one lot shared between two, I guess, separate occupants. So is that something under consideration?
So good question. I can answer that. Let me start that, Dan, and you can add on. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, maybe with the time left, I know we've spent some time on that question. I mean, go ahead and briefly answer, Joe, but I think we want to be a little brief on that, so we allow time for some other discussions.
Okay.
But in short, yeah, go ahead, Joe.
The short answer is not decided yet, could be considered. Basically, the Planning Commission has had one discussion, but we'll be revisiting back whether to try and sort of, I'll call it group smaller lot choices in particular areas and adding density in those areas versus a little bit more of a sprinkling across the different sub-districts that are there. And their first discussion, they favored more of a spread, but you asked whether it's discussable and on the table, and of course we're early in the process right now, but that has been their preference expressed to date.
Yeah, and while I can't go into details at this point, but we have discussed it with developers that have land options and property owners out there and kind of see what their preference is, which, you know, is based on the reality of what may actually happen there. So we're definitely looking at that as well.
Okay, and just to clarify, the sort of the thinking behind that question is, I understand that we can, we essentially now are giving developers the option. However, we may not actually end up with any increased density. So my thinking there was actually the way to force increased density and to maybe make some of these affordable housings. It seems like that is one of the potential options that would achieve that.
Okay. All right.
Thank you for that, Dan.
So back to the 20-year question. Doris, I see your hand is up. Did you have some thoughts on what you see in 20 years when you come back? Or maybe your hand was up from before. I see you're still, oh, there you are.
Am I on now?
Yes, you're on.
Okay.
Thank you.
If I could predict what would be happening with cars and transportation, I would have a better look into the future. But I think integrating this extra density within the districts, within the sub-districts in Frog Pond West is a better idea, so that in order to maintain the design standards. And I think it can be done. And I just wonder, when is the park going to be built if we're going to have all these additional houses?
Yeah. Anybody have quick answer on the park? That's a whole separate topic for Frog Pond.
Yeah, I mean, the quick answer is when there's enough homes built to fill the bank account to be able to spend the money to build it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right. We did have a couple of chat answers. Did anybody want to give a verbal answer on what they see when they come back in 20 years? Okay. Good one from Ben here. Walking, cycling, woods. I think the rest of it was trails and green spaces.
I'd like
Yeah,
to just quickly add something that, sorry, Ben, didn't mean to take away from you. I just wanted to quickly hit on something I'm not sure I heard in the presentation tonight, but I've heard Dan say multiple times on this project, which is that a significant portion of the master plan is staying the same. And so while we're talking about the potential to integrate a few middle housing types, a lot of the elements from the master plan, including design, wayfinding, the tree plan, the multimodal, bike-friendly walking, connection to the Buckman Trail and to the regional trails that go throughout the city, all of those components of the master plan are staying the same. So I just wanted to make sure that that was said. And go ahead, Ben. The stage is yours.
Thank you. I've lived in Wilsonville since 1984. And one of the things that I have noticed in the past, and I hope we can incorporate in the future, is there's a lot of, nature. That we are close to the river. We have the creek, like Beckman Creek, Canyon Creek. There's a lot of wildlife that actually uses these pathways. There's a lot of flood zone area down by the river. Anyway, as we develop, one of the things that I noticed about Villebois is it feels like literally, one home after another. And you can kind of see the nature on the outskirts, which is nice. But when we build in the future, it would be nice to have, to look out your window and see some trees as opposed to seeing, what your neighbor is having for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. That's if a home is 300,000 or 400,000, nobody wants to look out and see their, what their neighbor's wearing, before they go to work. And that's the thing that amazes me about Villebois is that there's literally, it feels like maybe a foot between some of these houses. And, you can go to a common space to see nature, but you can't plant a garden. You can't, have nature in your property, basically, unless it's your front yard.
Okay. All right. So I'm mindful of the time. We're coming up on 7 o'clock here. Let me just sort of open it up to the last question we had. Are there any issues or concerns that you meant to ask but hasn't been raised so far? Let's not repeat anything we may have covered, but something that didn't come up.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Doris, please.
Is the city going to be opening back up for regular public meetings at the city hall prior to the decisions being made, finalized on this?
Miranda, what's the outlook?
The outlook is that we've been very busy and over the last 2.5 weeks with our emergency operations center on the winter storm and the aftermath of the winter storm. We have not yet made any new decisions based on new information coming out of the governor's office about the status of COVID cases. I can say that from, City Hall is open. As you've mentioned, though, we have not been having community gatherings and meetings per se with a large number of people. Our planning commission and our city council meetings do allow people to attend them with special precautions in place, including minimizing the number of people who are in the room at any given time. There's sanitation, we require masks. There's a whole lot of things we can go over with you if you're wanting to actually attend in person. However, we're encouraging everyone just for the utmost safety to participate on phone or on Zoom if possible. We're making all of that available in that electronic media or even just by the phone calling into the Zoom meeting. because we want to be as safe as possible for our volunteers that sit on the commission, for our council, and for our community members. So I'm happy to assist anyone who's wanting to participate in those meetings who maybe doesn't have the capability to do so remotely, or to walk them through all the precautions to attend in person. In terms of having large events back at City Hall, I don't know. And that's probably just going to depend on the status of cases in Oregon and in the county, and when we get that direction that that is a safe thing to do.
Thanks.
Dan, why don't you let us know next steps and what's happening?
Certainly. So this will continue, taking this information and others that we're getting from other meetings. We'll report back to the Planning Commission and continue to take all that information we got when we audited our current code, as well as input and around design standards, and continue to develop this set of updated standards to further share with the community. So we're looking at really having this initial complete draft done by May, and then taking it out for additional feedback in early summer, which hopefully we'll be able to do in the closer to the way we used to do it. I'm hopeful for that, but time will tell. But I wanted to make sure that everyone here, I mean, we cover a lot of material. I'm happy to have one-on-one conversations with anyone. You can reach me via email by my last name, which you see is PAULY @ci.wilsonville.or.us. And my direct line is 503-570-1536. Happy to take input via email. That's a great input for us to collect and share with the Planning Commission as well. We're trying to be really open about this and answer questions, because it is some terms and kind of approaches that are different than some common understandings, and we just want to help people understand that and how it may impact their specific neighborhoods, as there's different cases and different scenarios throughout the community.
We'll take the slides from tonight and make sure they're available on Let's Talk Wilsonville, and the various materials we've been producing are also posted there. And you can also contact us through that. So
yeah, and there'll be additional surveys and input requests through that online engagement portal, Let's Talk Wilsonville, as well.
So with that, we hope this was useful. I want to thank everybody for taking some of their evening to join us tonight. You were awesome. So appreciate it. And we are adjourned. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Great job, Dan.
Thanks.
Are we done?
Thanks for staying.
Oh, we still have a couple people.